This chapter describes Ragatmika Bhakti, the spontaneous devotional service of the eternal residents of Vrindavan. Ragatmika, spontaneous bhakti, is of two types. Although here Prabhupada uses the term Raganuga for both the perfect spontaneous devotees and those who follow them, in Chaitanya Charitamrita he uses the term Ragatmika for the perfected devotees and Raganuga for those who are following them and aspiring to be like them. So the term Raganuga is used both for the perfect spontaneous devotees and those who follow them. But in the more technically speaking, the term Ragatmika refers to the devotees who are perfected spontaneous devotees, and Raganuga is for those who are following those perfected Ragatmika devotees in order to develop those same internal spiritual feelings of Raganuga sadhana bhakti. I wanted to mention that remember that Raganuga is also a stage in sadhana. Very important. That Raganuga, although it's spontaneous devotional service, it is still a stage in sadhana. It's still a stage in the practice of devotional service. It's not a stage in perfection. So we have to remember that it's not on the perfect stage. Sorry, one student is texting me. So this, even though this is on the stage of spontaneous devotion, it's still practice. Imagine how high bhava and prema is. On this stage, the devotee has recognized his eternal relationship with Krishna. The devotee has realized his swarupa, his eternal swarupa, his spiritual form, his spiritual body. And he starts serving the Lord internally in his spiritual body. But still, it's a stage in practice. And we can imagine just how far we still have to go. Like, sometimes we genuinely feel, I'm making a lot of spiritual advancement. I'm really there. I've started to develop taste for the holy name, and I like preaching, and the preaching is going so well, and I'm able to distribute many books. But Raganuga Bhakti is on the stage of sadhana, and Raganuga Bhakti begins when we start to recognize or realize our eternal swarupa for Krishna. And imagine we're still in sadhana. So this is really the ocean of devotion. And Rupa Goswami is showing us how vast this ocean of devotion is and how new we are to this process and how many wonderful things we must learn. Rupa Goswami defines Ragatmika Bhakti, or spontaneous attraction for something, while completely absorbed in thoughts of it, with an intense desire of love. So this is now not Raganuga Bhakti, this is Ragatmika Bhakti, or the Bhakti of those who are the eternal associates of the Lord. Spontaneous attraction for something, while completely absorbed in thoughts of it, with an intense desire of love. That's Ragatmika Bhakti. So complete absorption with an intense desire of love. This is an spontaneous attraction. This is the mood and the devotion of the eternal associates of Vrindavan. They have spontaneous attraction for Krishna. Their thoughts are completely absorbed in Krishna. They cannot have any other desire other than Krishna. And they have an intense love for him. There's three things. The types of Ragatmika Bhakti are sensual attraction and relationship. So there's two key types of Ragatmika Bhakti also. Ragatmika Bhakti, there must be not just a relationship, but also the spiritual senses become absorbed in the loving service of the Lord. Like the gopis is specifically described in the 10th canto, they are enlivened and their senses become enlivened by the touch of Krishna. So it's not just the thought of Krishna, hearing about Krishna, but when Krishna touches their body, their senses become fully enlivened. The attraction can be lust, fear, and envy, service, affection, and kinship. So in any of these ways, one can be attracted to Krishna. Even lust, fear, and envy, service, affection, and kinship. While the gopis can be characterized as lusty, this word indicates their extreme desire for Krishna and is the only word we can understand. Actual lust is to satisfy one's own senses, and the gopis' feeling is to satisfy Krishna's senses. Such a pure desire to satisfy another's senses is not found in the material world. So Srila Prabhupada here is explaining that in this world, we only have experience of lust. We actually have never experienced love in this world. We only fool ourselves when we think that, oh, I'm actually in a very loving relationship with someone. Yes, there's some love mixed in it, but primarily it is a relationship of lust. There's no love. Love can only be directed towards Krishna, because the practical reality is not our fault. In this world, we cannot be selfless towards anyone. Because if we're truly selfless, it means that we love them in spite of the fact that they can do anything to us. But we cannot allow that. We cannot love someone regardless of anything that they do to us. Because there's a limit, right? Even it may be a child, it may be a husband, it may be a wife. If they don't do something for us, if they at least don't not hurt us, we cannot have a relationship. But in the case of Krishna, because Krishna is so perfect, we can love him regardless of what he does with us. And similarly, Krishna can love us regardless of what we do with him. So that relationship is a relationship of pure love. It is completely perfect. It can be selfless. And therefore, that is love. Now, because in our own experience, we've only experienced lust, therefore the gopis' love is sometimes described as lusty desires. But in fact, it is on the stage of pure love. While demons such as Kansa and Shishupal achieve the same destination through their anger and envy directed at Krishna, this indicates that they achieved the spiritual sky. Demons and impersonalists generally attain the Brahma Jyoti, while devotees enter the Vaikuntha or Vrindavan pastimes. So even anger and envy can be engaged in the Lord's service. Sometimes we say that envy cannot, and that is true. Envy towards others cannot be engaged in Krishna's service, but even envy towards Krishna can purify us. Shishupal was so envious of the Lord, yet because he directed his envy towards Krishna, he received liberation. But the stage of liberation must be, the stage of liberation is not all the same. Unless we develop actual love for Krishna, we cannot enter into Golok, Vrindavan, or Vaikuntha. Therefore, these materialists who direct their anger and envy towards Krishna, they attain the Brahma Jyoti. And that Brahma Jyoti is a liberation. Then they fall again to this material world, but in a very pious situation, and then they develop their spiritual feelings towards Krishna. So they cannot directly enter Golok, Vrindavan in that mindset. The evidence of the purity of the gopis' love is given in the example of the strictness of Lord Chaitanya, who gave the gopis as the highest example. Gopja is given as an example of someone whose love for Krishna is almost pure desire. So the purity of the gopis' love can be shown by the example, can be understood, can be appreciated by the example of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so pure, was so strict, that he would not even look at the form of a wooden doll of a woman. He was thinking that that may inspire lusty desires within my heart. So he would not even look at the wooden form of a doll that was a woman, a female doll. And he would never speak to them, he would never see them, yet he was mad after the gopis' love for Krishna. He was always glorifying their transcendental love. So therefore their love cannot be on the platform of lust. The greatest sages, the yogis, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they are meditating on the gopis. They are glorifying their love. So how can their love be lust? The gopis in their last life, most of them were sages who met Lord Ramachandra and wanted to enjoy with him in the conjugal rasa. So the gopis themselves were great sages. So how could they be on the platform of lust? But Kubja is described that her initial attraction to Krishna was like Shishupal and Kansa. She was actually, she was not fully purified in heart. She had material lusty desires, but she saw Krishna, the most beautiful boy, young man. So she felt lusty towards Krishna. And because she directed her lust towards Krishna, her lust became completely purified and turned into pure love. Pure love, perfect. Right? And I used to think that how the women are more fortunate than the men, because Krishna's form is of a man, right? So they can focus all of their sensual desires towards Krishna. Any material desire that they have, any feeling, they can direct it towards Krishna as fully bona fide. This is Kubja, same feeling. Actually, we're all female, but those of us in the male form, we are actually in a bigger illusion because we are thinking that we are men, and therefore there can be a feeling of competition with Krishna. That I am a feeling of envy, that I should be Krishna, I should be that enjoyer. Of course, even in the materialist, even in the female form, we're trying to be enjoyers. So though the form is female, though the body is female, the mentality is male, wanting to be the enjoyer. And that is keeping us in the material world. But the fact is that we can direct our lusty desires towards Krishna. And this is why Srila Prabhupada writes in the beginning and end of the Rasa Leela description in the Krishna book, he says that anyone who reads and hears this Rasa Leela narration from the right source, from the authorized source, the lust within their hearts become purified. He says that anyone who reads about these loving exchanges, or materially speaking, not materially, but in terms of our understanding, these lusty exchanges between the gopis and Krishna, like people, they like to read romance novels because man or woman, it stimulates their desire. So if someone reads this, and obviously their heart is not purified, because this is what Prabhupada is saying, that even if you have those material desires, if you read the Rasa Leela, your heart becomes purified, and you will be able to give up those lusty desires. The only caveat there is that one must hear it from the pure source. So we have to read the Rasa Leela in the Krishna book through Srila Prabhupada's explanation. We cannot open up the 10th canto and directly read the Rasa Leela. And this is why Srila Prabhupada, the first book that he wrote after he came to America was the Krishna book. Imagine that these people all around him he saw were hippies, they were taking drugs, they're smoking, they were drinking, they're urinating in front of his door. And Srila Prabhupada sees his audience and says, let me give them the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the highest work. Even the Paramhansas, the liberated souls, they don't read the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. You have to first finish the first 9 cantos, but he gives them the 10th canto. Look at Srila Prabhupada's power, his vision, that he was so empowered that he could make that accessible to anyone. And then he instructed his devotees that you take this Krishna book and you distribute it on the street to anyone and everyone. That most confidential knowledge. There's one quote from Srila Prabhupada where he says, my heart's desire is that this Krishna book be present, go into every single home in America. This is actually a quote from Srila Prabhupada, where he specifically, among all the books, he directed his disciples to distribute the Krishna book. Because he said that I want that this book goes into the home of every single person in America. In the whole world, actually. But he was speaking to Americans at that time. So this is chapter 15. It's a very, very short chapter. It talks about the Ragatmika Bhaktas, which is the devotees that the Raganuga Bhakta imitates or emulates. So in Raganuga Bhakti, a person gets a hint of what their spiritual form is, their rasa is. Then once they know that, they find the devotee who is the perfect devotee in that rasa. So let's say if someone is in the Vatsalya ras, they will worship Nanda Baba and Yashoda Mai and try to emulate their feelings and their example and develop that meditation within their heart. And once they do that, then they start to progress in the Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. And so therefore chapter 16 now describes Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. After describing the Ragatmika Bhaktas, we come to Raganuga Bhakti. So spontaneous devotional service in practice. Again, remember, this is in practice, still in practice, but it's spontaneous devotion. The process of Raganuga Bhakti, spontaneous devotional service in practice, is described. In 3 ways it's described. It's eligibility, the categories, and the practices. So, this is a quote from Srila Prabhupada. Another part of sadhana bhakti is called Raganuga. Raganuga refers to the point at which, by following the regulated principles, one becomes a little more attached to Krishna and executes devotional service out of natural love. For example, a person engaged in devotional service may be ordered to rise early in the morning and offer arti, which is a form of deity worship. In the beginning, by the order of his spiritual master, one rises early in the morning and offers arti, but then he develops real attachment. When he gets this attachment, he automatically tries to decorate the deity and prepare different kinds of dresses, and thinks of different plans to execute his devotional service nicely. Although it is within the category of practice, this offering of loving service is spontaneous. So the practice of devotional service, sadhana bhakti, can be divided into 2 parts, namely regulative and spontaneous. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that Raganuga Bhakti is not like a magical wand that the spiritual master puts over the disciple and all of a sudden one day he wakes up as a gopi. No, the sadhana bhakti is when one performs very strictly the rules and regulations of devotional service. And when one is perfected in those performing those rules and regulations, that is, once one comes to the stage of nishtha. So there's bhajana kriya, that is the process of bhajan, sadhana. And as a result of bhajana kriya, we go through the process of anartha nivritti, which is a very, you could say, this is the most difficult part of devotional life. It's when we do our service, and as a result of that, the reward is that our anarthas come out. And we face all sorts of problems in our spiritual life, right? Dejection, rejection, offenses, feelings of resentment, conflicts. That's all anartha nivritti. And then one passes through that, gets purified. And then one comes to the platform of nishtha, where one is fixed in devotional life. One is not disturbed by any circumstance, by any situation, by any environment. Their devotion, their service to the Lord, and their mind is fixed on Krishna, regardless of any externals. That is called nishtha. And we see devotees like that their service goes on. They're very steady. And everything in the temple may be changing, this or that may happening, but they steadily do their devotional service. Somehow they're unaffected by it. That is the stage of nishtha. Then once we're in the stage of nishtha, the same activities that we've been doing, we get a taste for them because we start to relish the activities themselves. The activity is not based upon the externals, the appreciation that we get for those activities, but the activity is based upon the reciprocation that we feel from the spiritual master, from the devotees, and from Krishna. Particularly from Krishna, right? And the spiritual master. So that is the stage of when Raganuga starts. Prabhupada's example here is waking up for Mangalartik and doing Mangalartik. In the beginning, that is done with much discomfort by the order of the spiritual master. When some or the other, rises in the morning, the alarm, you press it like 14 times, the snooze button, before you're able to get up. And then some or the other, waking oneself up, one reaches the Mangalartik 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late. Like the devotees here always know, I'm always a few minutes late. And we feel relieved that some or the other, we have made it to the temple. And then by the end of Mangalartik, we actually start to realize that we're actually in the temple, and there's deities in front of us, and we're singing Mangalartik. So that is devotional service on the platform of Vaidhi sadhana. But when we come to the stage of Raganuga, then we wake up in the morning, and the moment we wake up, we have such a distaste towards sleeping, towards the mode of ignorance, that we immediately get up and we are running to go to Mangalartik because we have such a hankering to chant and sing before the deity, before the Lord, and we've developed such an attachment. So the same activity is there, but the complete feeling has changed. Like for the example of Raganuga, like the great souls in our movement, I saw myself, my Guru Maharaj, when he wakes up, it's like getting up from a chair. When he sleeps, it's like sitting in a chair. The bed will be there. He won't even care about the blankets. He'll just lie down in the same clothes that he has. He won't change into like night clothes, this, that. He just lies down on his bed. Exactly 3 or 4 hours later, everyone else's alarms might be going off. I mean, of course, he's not hearing them, but he has a clock next to him. He never puts on his alarm. But somehow at 3:30 in the morning, his eyes just open. And then he gets up, like as though he never slept. He gets up, and sometimes, it gets very late. So he sleeps at like midnight. So he'll get up like, Mangalarti is 4:30, he'll get up at 4. And one time he got up at like 4:15. And devotees said, oh, he got up at 4:15. Guru Maharaj will not do Mangalarti on the altar. He's always on the altar in the morning doing Mangalarti. In any temple, wherever he is, he'll be there. So devotees were convinced that, Maharaj just got up, so he won't be there. And sure enough, at 4:29, he's knocking on the pujari door. He's there. And on his way there, the servant thought that Maharaj will not come. So he was like, the servant was not around Maharaj because he was thinking Maharaj will be in the bathroom, get ready. Then as he was leaving his apartment, going into the temple, then the servant realized that, oh, Maharaj is actually leaving. So he ran there, and then he's walking next to Guru Maharaj, and Guru Maharaj tells him with great pride, he says, I got ready in 5 minutes. And literally it was 5 minutes. It was just unbelievable. like how one could be so fast. Like everything, he did everything in 5 minutes. Clothes, changing, showering, everything, brushing the teeth. And 5 minutes at 4:29, he was standing there at the door. So that is this same activities. The activities don't change in devotional life, but performing on the spontaneous level. Completely spontaneous. Such a taste, such a hankering for Krishna. Spontaneous love of Krishna, as exhibited by the Vrishnis and the denizens of Vrindavan, is eternally existing in them. In the stage of devotional service, where regulated principles are followed, there is no necessity of discussing this love, for it must develop of itself at a more advanced stage. So you will see that in our movement, in our classes and things, we don't discuss Raganuga Bhakti so much. Like we don't talk about how, we need to we need to discover our eternal spiritual form and this and that. Because Srila Prabhupada himself said that we should not discuss this so much, because when we are ready, then he said the spiritual master will automatically reveal one's Swarupa within the heart of the disciple. So when we are ready, this gets revealed to us. And on this stage, it's all through the heart and not through the book. And this is why it's very interesting how even in Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we see that how, Raganuga, Bhava, Prema, these are such immense stages of devotional life. But there's so little that's written on them. And the first 15 chapters we've just completed is Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Then Raganuga, 2 chapters, Bhava, 2 chapters, and Prema, which is the highest thing, only 1 chapter. So why is this? Because the place where we really need help is Vaidhi Sadhana. Because Krishna is not speaking to us directly from within the heart. So Rupa Goswami has to tell us step by step, do this. All these 64 items are there. The 5 most potent items are there. Serve the spiritual master. The 3 most important items are there. He needs to describe everything step by step in detail. But once you get to Raganuga Bhakti, then there's nothing much to say. The devotee is already on the plane's already off the ground. Now the devotee is being guided by the Lord, by the spiritual master from within the heart. You'll also see this in Srila Prabhupada's books, that the more basic the verse is, the longer the purport will be, right? And in the CC, sometimes Chaitanya Charitamrita, sometimes you see very esoteric verses. I mean, super deep that you think need a book for an explanation. And Srila Prabhupada will have no purport or 1 line. Because he knows that if we're neophyte, we won't understand it anyway. It's not for us. And if we are advanced, then we'll understand it. So the devotional service and practice is discussed, but devotional service on the spontaneous level is not discussed so much. There's no necessity of discussing this love, for it must develop of itself at a more advanced stage. Keep in mind that while Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti is an advanced stage, it is in the realm of practice, not perfection. As I mentioned, even Raganuga is in the stage of practice. So these devotees actually that I was describing, they're not even just on Raganuga. They're acting spontaneously in their service, but probably on the stage of, Bhava and Prema like that. So what to speak of them? Even the person who's on the stage of Raganuga is spontaneously serving Krishna. So this is a verse in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu where Srila Rupa Goswami describes the eligibility. Who can practice Raganuga Bhakti? Who is qualified? We said just in the last slide that it's on the stage of practice. So at what point in our practice are we qualified to practice Raganuga Bhakti? Ragatmikaika nishthaye vrajavasi janadaya tesham bhavaptaye lubdho bhaved atradhikaravan. That person who is greedy for attaining a bhava similar to that of the inhabitants of Raja is qualified for Raganuga Bhakti. So what is the eligibility? The same eligibility that was for pure devotional service, which is one must have agreed to attain bhava similar to that of the inhabitants of Raja. It's agreed to develop those same feelings. It's agreed to join Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan that qualifies a person for Raganuga Bhakti. There's one letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote to his GBCs to stop men and women in the movement, to stop sannyasis, gurus. And in this letter, Srila Prabhupada told them that you have great responsibilities and you must take your leadership positions very seriously and perform your duties very nicely. But then he ends the letter by saying, but you must remember that your most important duty among all your duties as a GBC member is to become mad after Krishna, is to develop your madness for Krishna. So our greed should be at all times that I want to become a servant of the servant of the servant of the inhabitants of Raja, right? I want to develop those same feelings of devotion that the inhabitants of Vrindavan have. So that is the greed. And therefore, in the life of an advanced devotee, therefore, nothing else is important for them. Because their only goal in mind is that they want to go to the eternal world. The present world, the physical world becomes less and less important. The internal spiritual world and spiritual form becomes more and more important as they progress. And they become less and less cognizant or aware of the material world and more conscious of the spiritual world. Just like one time Srila Prabhupada was in Los Angeles and he told his disciples, did you not notice Krishna and Balaram were playing on the other side of this wall? He just said it, and then he realized what he said. And then the devotee said, no, Srila Prabhupada, we didn't notice it at all. He said, yes, Krishna and Balaram were there. So he was conscious of the spiritual world, somewhat conscious of the material world, just enough to get by. Similarly, another time they did a program for Srila Prabhupada and no one came. It was an empty hall. Everyone was very dejected. Prabhupada, embarrassed. We called you and you came this way and there's no one here. Srila Prabhupada said that Narad Muni was here. Vyasadeva was here. Did you not notice? The whole parampara was here. My spiritual master was here. They said, no, we didn't notice. He said, yes, they were all here, but you did not notice. So the devotees of the inhabitants of Raja, they are living in a different world. Special natural appreciation of the descriptions of a particular pastime of Godhead indicates the constitutional position of a living entity. So, again, this is discussed only amongst advanced devotees because a neophyte devotee cannot apply this statement. But an advanced devotee, when they are specially attracted to a particular pastime of the Lord, that becomes an indication of their constitutional position. So the great devotees of the Lord, they know what their position is. But those who are starting on the path of Raganuga Bhakti, they are just learning what their position is. And if they're particularly inspired by a particular pastime, that can be an indication. Like one devotee is particularly inspired by the pastime of Madhavendra Puri, then that can be a particular indication. And this is the case of some devotees in our movement. They don't share these things, but sometimes you get to know these things, that they particularly have a very special attraction for a particular pastime. And that indicates what their service is in the spiritual world. And we have to remember, many devotees are in Krishna Leela, many devotees are in Gaura Leela, and many devotees are in Lord Ram's Leela, Lord Nrsingadev's Leela. So they have different pastimes at different places, and they can be simultaneously in two different Leelas, particularly Gaur Leela and Krishna Leela, because the devotees in Gaur Leela and Krishna Leela are both the same, generally, quite often. So many of our great souls in this movement, of course, Srila Prabhupada was, but even his followers, they are in Gaur Leela. And that the indication is very clear that they have a role in Lord Chaitanya's. They have realized their eternal Swarupa in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. When an advanced realized devotee hears about the affairs of the devotees of Vrindavan in the mellows of Shanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya, he becomes inclined in one of these ways, and his intelligence becomes attracted. Indeed, he begins to covet that particular type of devotion. When such covetousness is awakened, one's intelligence no longer depends on the instructions of Shastra or on logic and argument. So they start to covet, meaning they start to meditate, pine for a particular type of devotion. When an advanced devotee, Prabhupada he says here, when an advanced realized devotee hears about the affairs of devotees of Vrindavan in Shanta, Dasya, Sakhya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya, they begin to covet that particular pastime. And you see in our movement that how, like, devotees are no longer, then the second point here, this is the part I wanted to say, that they no longer depend on the instructions of Shastra, logic, and argument. But they're still depending on the instruction of the spiritual master, because the spiritual master is actually the leader in their service to Krishna. Like, most likely in the spiritual world, we're in some place where Srila Prabhupada is the leader of our party. Therefore, all of us have been connected to Srila Prabhupada's movement. Or if we become connected, then we join him, because he's the one who takes us to the spiritual world. Similarly, our spiritual masters, then we have, like that. But, sometimes you see in our movement that there's very advanced devotees and they have a relationship that is so close, but is beyond ordinary formality and etiquette. So just like recently, His Holiness Kadamba Kanana Maharaj and Jayadvaita Maharaj were there in Vrindavan Dham, and Kadamba Kanana Maharaj left his body. So when he was leaving his body, then Jayadvaita Maharaj was there the whole time. And before he became very ill, Kadamba Kanana Maharaj was doing Vrindavan Parikrama with all the devotees. And at every place he would go, he would describe Krishna's pastimes there. And Jayadvaita Maharaj was also going with him. They were both going together. And I was seeing one video of him where Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, he is a disciple of Jayadvaita Maharaj, but he's sitting in the middle, and the whole party is filled with his disciples. But Jayadvaita Maharaj only took 3 disciples or 4 disciples, a handful of disciples. And Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, his own disciple, took more than 1,000. And so his disciples are filled there. He's sitting in the middle, and he's speaking, and Maharaj is sitting on the side. And Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, devotees, is completely dedicated to a spiritual master. He preaches wherever his spiritual master asks him to preach. He's like completely a servant. But in that relationship, he was sitting there and he was just speaking very comfortably, even sometimes making jokes about, very respectful jokes, but like joking about something with Jayadvaita Maharaj like this. And you could understand that, that this is no longer on the level of ordinary logic and argument. That both of these great exalted souls have realized their eternal relationship with Krishna. Jayadvaita Maharaj knows that Kadamba Kanana Maharaj is no longer on the platform of ego or envy or pride. There's no pride in his heart. He's just doing his service. And both of them are completely liberated souls. So while Kadamba Kanana Maharaj is fully dedicated to him, the external formality became less important and the relationship became more important. Though the spiritual master should go first, then the disciple is going first, is leaving the material world first, and the spiritual master is leaving second. How is it possible? Because there's no logic or argument on this stage. This is the stage of perfection. And on our stage of practice, we cannot understand or judge these things. Further, Rupa Goswami expands on this eligibility. Who is eligible? Tat tad bhavadi madhurye stutedhir. Tat tad bhavadi madhurye shrutedhir yadupekshate. Natra shastram na yuktim ja tallabho lobhotpatik lakshanam. The appearance of that greed is indicated when the intelligence does not depend on rules of scripture and logic. The appearance of that greed is indicated when the intelligence does not depend on rules of scripture and logic. After realizing to some degree the sweetness of their love through the process of hearing from the scriptures. So that intelligence does not depend on rules of scripture and logic. Like sometimes Prabhupada would do things that were beyond logic. Like no one could figure out how Prabhupada was so intelligent. Logically, there's no way to figure out. But their intelligence comes from a different place. So that greed is the eligibility, we said, right? It's the greed to enter into Krishna's pastimes. And that greed is indicated when the intelligence on how to serve Krishna does not come from ordinary intelligence based on scripture and logic. But the sweetness of the love for Krishna becomes the most overarching thing. And that's why, again, it's very hard to judge advanced devotees. It's very dangerous to do so. Because why they're doing, if they can immediately see the person's heart, they can immediately see Krishna's desire, and accordingly they act. So what is then the relationship between scripture and Raganuga Bhakti? As soon as the greed manifests in him for attaining a bhava similar to that of the Vrajavasis, he, the devotee, develops an inclination for Raga Bhakti. The practitioner of Raganuga Bhakti does not depend any longer on scriptural rules and logic. However, wherever the greed has appeared, it is understood that the person must have studied the scriptures in order to attain that greed. It is also necessary to study the scriptures in order to understand the proper sadhana for Raganuga Bhakti. So, Raganuga Bhakti does not depend any longer on scriptures or logic. Just like in the Gita, we read that Krishna says that one must cut the forest, the banyan tree of this material world of attachments through the sharp axe of detachment. Through that axe of detachment, one has to cut the bonds of this world. But then once we become perfected, we throw away that axe. So we use that axe to cut out of this world, but then once the use of it is long, you throw it away. On the level of spontaneous devotion, this is the point. But in order to come to that point of greed, one must have read the scriptures. One must have done so much service, right? So this is why we do so much service, because it's that service that inspires us to advance and eventually come to Raganuga Bhakti. It's that service that is so potent, that is so powerful, that it increases that greed within our heart. Because that greed is not an ordinary thing. You see, the greed is the only thing we're lacking. If we had the greed, then there's no problem. We're already reached the perfection. But the purpose of the service is to develop the greed, right? We would think that as a result of the greed, we would do the service. But no, the service, greed is something so special that the service leads one to that greed. Because right now we have no intense desire to get Krishna. Therefore, Krishna does not manifest himself in front of us. Rather, we are greedy for our material things. We are greedy for a position in the material world. We are greedy for our, nice society, friendship, and love in this material world. So the greed is what is very rare. Just like I was reading a book just recently where it was mentioning how the devotees of the Lord who suffer because of separation from Krishna. We know that there's devotees who suffer out of separation from Krishna. And this great saint was saying that how it is that suffering which is sought after by great devotees of the Lord. By the devotees seek that suffering. The first point is that suffering, when the devotee suffers out of separation from the Lord, then that suffering is the highest bliss in this world. The devotee who is suffering out of separation from Krishna will not trade that suffering for the highest happiness in this material world, right? So the greatest happiness in this material world is not even one farthing in front of the suffering the devotee feels out of separation from the Lord. That's how great that suffering is. But that suffering is something that is sought after the devotees, and that's the most fortunate stage. Why? I mean, to suffer is so easy. Because in this world, we're always suffering because of wanting material things. So who in this world suffers out of separation for Krishna? Right? Is there anyone of us in this call who can say that, I'm really suffering because I wasn't able to see Krishna yesterday? Right? I'm just really suffering because, because tears are not flowing down my eyes. No, see Krishna, great. If I didn't see Krishna, that's okay. I chanted my rounds. I didn't feel anything, but anyway, I did my chanting. I did all 16. Now I can do whatever I like, So whether we get Krishna or not, we don't suffer. So what is very rare, what is the greatest achievement, is the fact that a devotee will suffer out of a feeling of affection for Krishna. The suffering itself is what is so rare. When the devotee suffers in separation, then we know it's a very exalted stage. In the same way, the greed itself is what is rare. Raganuga bhakti is rare, but that is a detail. The main thing that is rare is that the greed for Krishna is rare. And once you get that, then Raganuga automatically follows. So, how do we get to Raganuga Bhakti? This is the path of eligibility. We first hear the pastimes of Krishna. Therefore, all spiritual life starts with hearing. By hearing again and again the beautiful pastimes of the Lord, we experience the sweetness of those pastimes. This is why when great souls come, we should go and attend all their classes. We should hear from them, because that hearing is the beginning of Raganuga Bhakti. When they speak, then we actually can taste the sweetness of these narrations about Krishna. From that sweetness, we develop greed. From sweetness, we get greed. This is so sweet. Now I cannot just hear about it. I actually have to, participate in this. So from sweetness, we get the greed. And from the greed, there's a decrease in scriptural regulation. Then one is serving Krishna spontaneously. Someone may argue that particularly Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur warned that the awakening of one's eternal specific position happens only to those who are liberated. At the same time, they both, following Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswamis, consistently presented Raganuga as a sadhana done by sadhakas. Therefore, the purity that almost always is necessary for an awakening is not absolute. So, what is special about our process? Our process of sadhana is very special, unlike other traditions, because in our process of sadhana, the way Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Srila Prabhupada designed it is that it is a sadhana that is positioned to lead us to Raganuga. It is a sadhana in the practice, so to say, of going to Raganuga. And this is why the prayers that we sing, like Tulsi Puja, are so confidential. Though, it may be the first day a devotee ever joined the temple, they're still learning how to wear dhoti, their tilak is crooked. And then in Tulsi Puja, they're asking, Mora e Abhilash, Bilash Kunja Diyavas. In Tulsi Puja, they're asking, my Lord, please give me residence in one of the kunjas of Vrindavan. So how is this possible? This is the immense mercy of our acharyas. On one hand, they're saying you can only do this if you're liberated. But on the other hand, they're giving us a sadhana that is, if done nicely, and that's up to us how we do it, it is Raganuga. So they're developing that greed within our heart. And by the mercy of the devotee, we can do what we normally cannot do. Therefore, the purity that is necessary for awakening is not absolute, because ultimately it depends on the grace, on the mercy. And when the mercy comes, then we're ready. So we have to beg for that mercy. In this connection, Srila Prabhupada defines the stage for the eligibility for Raganuga sadhana in Nectar Devotion, chapter 16. In following the regulated principles of devotional service, there's a stage called Anartha Nivritti, which means the disappearance of all material contamination. Anartha Nivritti is a stage in the middle of practice. It is not a stage of perfection. From the point of view of a gross materialist, such persons are liberated and free from all material desires. So, as I mentioned to you, when we're doing bhajana kriya, then the next stage that comes is anartha nivritti. From the point of view of the eternally perfected Ragatmika Bhaktas, such persons are in the gradual process of awakening and still harbor some subtle anarthas. So the anarthas have not fully gone in the stage of Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. So though one is on the stage of Nishtha, one has to be on the stage of Nishtha before doing Raganuga. Well, not always, one will still get some emotions, some spontaneous emotions, but the anarthas may still linger. Srila Prabhupada writes of the Raganuga sadhakas, there's a gradual development of the ambition to become like a particular devotee. And this activity is called Raganuga. We note the word gradual in Prabhupada's statement. So gradually one is developing the ambition to become a particular devotee. That's on the stage of sadhana. It's a sadhaka, and the anarthas are still vanishing as we are developing the ambition to become like a particular devotee. So Prabhupada's quotes on this point, transcendental platform means above the three modes of material nature, which is called Brahma Bhuta. Without being in liberated stage, nobody can engage in devotional service. So this is on Nectar Devotion. This is a lecture on the Nectar Devotion. So devotional service cannot be, Prabhupada here is saying, engaged in until we are liberated, which means above the modes of material nature, which means pretty much past the stage of anartha nivritti. Bhakti begins when one is actually liberated from the influence of the modes of material nature. Actually, we are in the material state, but we are being trained up. But even in the training period, if one is sincere and serious, he's liberated. He's liberated. It is so nice. Krishna consciousness is so nice that even in the training period, although he's not mature. So now, Prabhupada here is saying, you cannot do devotional service until you're not liberated. So we may think, okay, Raganuga is only when I'm completely free of anarthas. But Prabhupada is saying that if we're sincerely and seriously doing the training, that even in the training period, that person becomes liberated on account of engaging in those activities. Which means that if we're liberated even in the training stage, we can start Raganuga Bhakti even in the training stage. So now, Srila Rupa Goswami and Prabhupada describes what is not Raganuga Bhakti. In this connection, we should be careful about the so-called Siddha Pranali. The Siddha Pranali process is followed by a class of men who are not very authorized and who have manufactured their own way of devotional service. They imagine that they have become associates of the Lord simply by thinking of themselves like that. This external behavior is not at all according to the regulated principles. The so-called Siddha Pranali process is followed by the Prakrita Sahajas in the Sura sect of so-called Vaishnavism. In the opinion of Rupa Goswami, such activities are simply disturbances to the standard way of devotional service. So this is actually a very big topic. What is the meaning of Sahaja? Sahaja means someone who takes something very valuable and makes it ordinary. That is the general definition of Sahaja. When you take something that is very valuable and you say that it is ordinary. So if someone goes into a jeweler's shop and takes gold and says, this is just a yellow stone, then he's a Sahaja. Right? He's taking gold and making it ordinary, not realizing that it's extraordinary. Similarly, Sahaja takes that which is the highest, Krishna's intimate pastimes. It says, it's ordinary. I am Krishna, you are gopis, let's dance. So that is Sahaja. So the Siddha Pranali, the unauthorized Siddha Pranali is when this sect will assign, as soon as someone joins, they'll assign them some eternal Swarupa. They will say, you are, this Manjari, you are this Gopi, you are this coward boy, and now you play your role. You do your bhakti in a way, in that mood of that devotee. So then oftentimes they'll come in the temple dressed in blue, green, and yellow. They'll have a purple dhoti because all of a sudden they decided that they are maybe Jatila or Kutila and they're wearing this particular sari. So they actually act out those devotees because they feel that they are following Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. In some bona fide Vaishnava traditions, there used to be the practice where the spiritual master, being a liberated soul, would reveal to the disciple that actually this is your Swarupa in the spiritual world, even before the disciple is ready for it, so to say, aware of it, is able to be aware of it. So they reveal the Swarupa before the disciple sort of earns it. But even that practice was not followed or not endorsed by Srila Prabhupada, because we will make it very cheap. We'll start writing letters to people and saying, please come and, give me some nice gulab jamuns and laddus because I am the servant of Madhu Mangal in the spiritual world. It'll become a joke. We will make the whole thing into a very frivolous, nonsensical thing. And this is why Prabhupada's process was that when you're ready from within your heart, the spiritual master will tell you. So if you're advanced enough to see the spiritual master, hear the spiritual master within the heart, then that very moment when we're advanced enough to do that, the spiritual master will tell us from within the heart. Right? If we can hear him in the heart, then he has no problem telling us. But externally, they don't. Or they only tell to very advanced devotees. So what is Siddha Pranali? Siddha Pranali actually started off as something bona fide, but then it became corrupt. Ekadasa Bhava, 11 elements of one's spiritual identity are revealed. So Siddha Pranali is actually a bona fide process mentioned in Harinam Chintamani and Jaiva Dharma Bhaktivinoda Thakur for developing the Siddha Deha, or the Siddha body, the eternal body. Details given in Gaur Govinda Smarana Padati by Dhyana Chandra Goswami, not mentioned in the works of the 6 Goswamis. So the details are actually given in a bona fide text, but they're not mentioned in the works of the six Goswamis because this is not the mainstream process. At the time of Varana Dasha, the second stage of meditation, the Guru gives the disciple his identity as a Manjari with specific details. So this is the second stage. I'm not very acquainted with this, but there's a first stage and a second stage. So once one reaches the second stage, the Guru will actually reveal to the disciple his identity as a Manjari. So we can only imagine that these great souls in our movement who have done so much service for Srila Prabhupada, who are so spiritually advanced, certainly Srila Prabhupada must have revealed their identity with specific details. If even ordinarily these souls were doing this, that on the second stage of meditation, this would be revealed, then certainly Prabhupada has revealed that. And according to Mother Urmila, who I spoke to in Mayapur one time, she was saying that according to her, and I'm just quoting her, that she knows many devotees in this movement who have discovered or who are aware of their spiritual form. So this is a real thing. If we have real greed for this, Prabhupada's process can take us to the highest levels of prema bhakti. It's not just that we stay on Vaidhi sadhana bhakti our entire life. We can if we want to, but if we want to advance, there's no shortage of mercy in Prabhupada's process. So many devotees have realized their specific identity. So how do we practice Raganuga Bhakti? One should specifically engage himself in the type of devotional service for which he has a natural aptitude. For example, one person may have a particular interest in hearing, another may have a particular interest in chanting, and another may have a particular interest in serving in the temple. So these, or any of the other 6 different types of devotional service, remembering, serving, praying, engaging in some particular service, being in a friendly relationship, or offering everything in one's possession, should be executed in full earnestness. In this way, everyone should act according to his particular taste. You see? So, how do we develop Raganuga? Just by doing, Prabhupada is saying, the service which resonates with our natural aptitude. So if we like to take care of Tulsi Maharani, we should really take care of Tulsi Maharani. Because then, by doing that service, we will gradually develop a spontaneous taste. And that's the most wonderful thing. If we develop a spontaneous taste, then we're in the spiritual world. Then we will spontaneously serve Krishna. But it's in our conditioned stage. The point here is that in our conditioned stage, it's easier to do things spontaneously. It's easier to do things that we like spontaneously than the things that we don't like. So on the liberated stage, one is doing because of an internal meditation, and it's not based upon our external material likes and dislikes. That is the next stage. But even in the conditioned stage, one can aspire for this by doing devotional services for which one has a natural aptitude and doing them a lot. So some devotees, they love kirtan. Nothing wrong with it. Do kirtan all the time. Some people love to hear and study Shastra and read Srimad Bhagavatam and teach Srimad Bhagavatam and be absorbed in Srimad Bhagavatam. That is perfection. Some devotees like to do deity worship, like their whole life is deity worship. The deity minister of our movement, like this is all he does. He does, 12 hours of deity service probably every day. And, for me, like, after an hour, I can't do more deity service. I don't have a natural aptitude for that. But, I like other things in devotional service. Now, of course, someone may be doing it on a different level due to their spontaneous attraction. So also we have to remember that these devotees are doing it at different levels and their motivations are different. But On my level, I know, on the basic level, there's certain things for which I have a more aptitude for doing. So those things, Prabhupada here is saying, we can do in full earnestness, and in this way, develop our Krishna consciousness. Among the 64 angas of bhakti, even for those practicing Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, under the heading of servitorship, devotees should serve the Lord according to their taste and ability. According to their taste and ability. Also, offering a favorite article includes doing for the Lord activities one enjoys. So one of the 64 items of devotional service was offering a favorite article to the Lord. That can be translated as, okay, if you like mango, then offer mango to Krishna. But it can also mean that element, that's principle of devotional life, also means what you enjoy, you're offering to Krishna. What you enjoy doing or what you do well, you're offering it to Krishna. Because it's a favorite article, you're offering that to Krishna. In Vaidhi, such choice of service is often related to one's temporal mood and ability. So here's the point. In Vaidhi, such choice of service is often related to one's temporal mood and ability. In Raganuga, that choice is more about what nourishes the development of one's inner meditation on a specific eternal service. So we cannot identify the Raganuga Bhakta with us, because in Raganuga, the choice is not based upon one's mood and ability, based on the body that one has, but rather it's based upon what nourishes the development of one's inner meditation. And in the stage of Vaidhi sadhana, it may be related to one's mood and ability, but also in Vaidhi sadhana, the main motivation is the fulfillment of the instruction of the spiritual master. And that instruction generally resonates with our mood and ability, because the spiritual master engages us according to our mood and ability. So it's not just based upon our mood and ability, otherwise we can become sense enjoyers on the Vaidhi sadhana platform. It's also based upon the instruction of the spiritual master. More importantly, it's based upon that. But within that instruction, one can really work on those that resonate with one's mood and ability, because one can do those all the time because one enjoys them, and in this way purify one's existence. One can purify that nature by engaging in Krishna's service. That's the point. Main thing is Krishna's service, and we should be willing to do anything for him, even if it's our nature or not our nature. But we all have a nature, and the point here is that if we engage that nature in Krishna's service, we're purifying it, and in this way spiritualizing it. The devotee should always think of Krishna within himself and should choose a very dear devotee who is a servitor of Krishna in Vrindavan. One should constantly engage in topics about the servitor and his loving relationship with Krishna, and one should live in Vrindavan. If one is physically unable to go to Vrindavan, he should mentally live there. And this is a very important point. We find that many great devotees, they are always traveling and preaching. They cannot go to Vrindavan. But one thing you will see them is that they start to live in Vrindavan. Their meditation becomes Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. They start talking about Vrindavan. They start thinking about Vrindavan. They're reading about Vrindavan. And they become absorbed in Vrindavan, right? So this is the point, that one is living in Vrindavan, at least in mind, and one is engaged in topics, particularly on that Ragatmika Bhakta, that servitor who one is trying to follow in their footsteps. How to practice Raganuga Bhakti? The Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu describes in 1.2.229, the advanced devotee who is inclined to spontaneous loving service should follow the activities of a particular associate of Krishna's in Vrindavan. He should execute service externally as a regulated devotee, as well as internally from a self-realized position. Thus, he should perform devotional service both externally and internally. So what about the devotee who says that actually, Prabhu, I'm a Raganuga Bhakta. So that's why I don't come to wash the pots, because I am a Raganuga Bhakta. So that is being refuted here, because that's not possible, because a Raganuga Bhakta doesn't give up his services. But a Raganuga Bhakta serves Krishna externally as a regulated devotee, but then internally he's serving in his particular meditation in Vrindavan. So he does both external and internal. So therefore, it's not that it's one or the other. So this is now the full chart. It's the summary of this chapter. Think of Krishna. Choose a devotee who is very dear servitor in relationships similar to that, to what has awakened within oneself, and discuss this devotee's activities. Physically or mentally live in Vrindavan. So one chooses a devotee and one has discussing this devotee's activities and thinking of Krishna. After that, meditate on the relationship of service between Krishna and this devotee. Do not manifest this meditation externally. Externally behave as a neophyte. Third stage, engage in the specific angas of bhakti according to one's taste that help to develop the specific relationship one aspires for with the Lord. So then one actively engages in those things that particularly nourish that relationship. And finally, gradually one will develop the internal sentiments of the devotee one is following. So then those internal sentiments become manifest fully. So these are the two bodies that we have. The physical body is, through the physical body, one should follow the conduct given by Rupa Goswami, the 64 Angas of Bhakti, particularly focusing on what suits one's taste and relationship with the Lord. 1 second. And then we have our internal body, the Siddha Deha. Identify as a cowherd boy, cowherd girl, etc. Follow the conduct of the residents of Raja in meditation. So this is the illumination of the previous slide, where it said that internally, that the Raganuga Bhakta is doing both things, externally and internally. So the physical body, the Raganuga Bhakta is doing this, and with his internally, his Siddha body, Siddha Deha, he's identifying with a particular resident of Vrindavan and following their conduct. There are two types, Kamanuga, devotion in the conjugal mood, and Sambandhanuga, that aspires for one. Okay, so this part I'm going to do next time. So we'll stop here because this is actually a very long chapter. So this time we did, this is the second chapter we're doing, right? So we did chapter 15 and part of 16. Next time we'll do the rest of 16 and maybe 17. We'll see how we do. But now, after this part, now we go in a new topic, which is, we do the second part of Raganuga Bhakti, which is how do devotees follow in the footsteps of the residents of Vrindavan. So there's two different categories of these devotees. And one category follows particularly in the footsteps of the gopis of Vrindavan, and the other category follows in the other, residents of Vrindavan. So that's another 1 hour discussion. So we'll stop here now. If there's any comments, discussion, any questions, then we can do that now. Yes. Hare Krishna Mataji, Kamala Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Pranam Prabhuji. As always, you've enlightened us so much, and every time I feel like how much less qualified we are and how far we have to go, and that increases day by day, like after each and every class that we are going on. So thank you so much for that insight that you're giving us and sharing with us, Prabhuji. And actually, it's a long chapter, so almost I had 3 questions. I don't know if you have that much time, but
yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
So Prabhuji, like you were talking about Anarth Nivritti in this chapter, and then in the second chapter we read about the Parabd. So how are we going to differentiate between the two? Because sometimes it so happens that it may be the reaction of our previous karma, but we are so in a stage that that we think that we are at the stage of anartha because we think that we are a great devotee of the Lord. So how are we going to differentiate between these two? Because it's a very thin line.
Between anartha nivritti and prarabdha, you said?
Yes.
So which stage is prarabdha on in your mind?
So
which stage
prarabdha for me is like the initial stages, I would say, because we are still in the stage of learning how to be connected to Krishna. So because he says that once because he burns all the prarabdha and karmas, then how are we going to differentiate now?
Yes. So see, at the stage of anartha nivritti is a stage where one is still working through one's prarabdha karmas. Because the stage of anartha nivritti is not the stage, it's before, so you have shraddha, faith. First we have faith. Then we engage in the process of bhajana kriya. Now, as soon as we engage in the process of bhajana kriya, as soon as we start doing that, our anarthas start coming out, anartha nivritti. Right? As soon as we engage in bhajana kriya, there will be some conflicts. I'm washing, I'm mopping the temple floor, and someone says something that's not very nice. So anartha, I take offense naturally. So anartha nivritti starts right at the time we start the process of bhakti. And at that time, we still have reactions because we have not fully surrendered to Krishna. We're still struggling with our past reactions. So it's through the process of anartha nivritti that we become clear of all of our prarabdha and aprarabdha karmas. Because bhakti burns all of those away in a moment. And the karma goes the moment we start bhakti, but then there's also the remaining vasanas. Like Prabhupada says, the fan is stopped, but the switch is off, but the fan is still running. So bhakti is started, the switch is off, but the fan is still running. So that is anartha nivritti. And once we work through that, then we come nishtha. Then fine, the people around us are not perfect, but because we are on the stage of nishtha, it doesn't make a difference to us. So the difference here is that we have changed, and therefore, because we're on the stage of nishtha, we're able to transcend, we're able to overcome those troubles and continue in our service. It doesn't affect us. So like Prabhupada, right? He could work in any situation, which means that if we're like Prabhupada, then we don't have any anarthas. So then we come to the platform Nishtha and Gohan, yes.
Yeah, Prabhuji. And the other question that I had was like, you said that initially we all do the services that are, that are likable for us. So, and on the other hand, we realize and we feel that when as a couple, we are doing some certain services, if we do them together, then it gives us more progress. And but sometimes it so happens that the inclinations are different. So how are we going to balance and bring together the like differences and
Mm.
make it the same, like as a singular process rather than making it plural for husband and wife? So
Mm. That's a nice one. That's a nice question. It's uh, the reason why we enter Grahastha ashram is because we have material desires, and because we have, we still have, we're still, involved in this material world, and therefore we have differences because we have different desires. So, like we were reading in these slides, that on the stage of Vaidhi sadhana, one still is acting according to one's taste, but the taste is due to our external body. The taste is due to our temporal nature. And so because each one of us has different bodies and different modes of material nature, and we're in different modes of nature, we will have different tastes.
yes.
When we serve Krishna on the stage of Raganuga Bhakti, then that motivation is not coming from the external, but it's coming from the internal. So once we're on the stage of Raganuga Bhakti, then we'll see with other like-minded devotees, we'll be in perfect synergy, because the taste is coming out of the desire to serve Krishna. But up till that point, we have to balance it and manage it just like we would manage material things, right? Material differences of opinion or material taste, right? We compromise and say, okay, you want to do this, I want to do this. Okay, let's do something in the middle, or half an hour what you like to do, half an hour what I like to do. Just like in material things, because although spiritual life is not material, what's producing the desire to engage in certain activities is a material mode of nature. So that's why, even though we're devotees, right, sometimes we have to use material techniques for managing things, for structuring things. Why? It's spiritual, it should be spontaneous, because we're still acting from the material level. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. And one last question. I'm
Yes.
not sure because
Sure,
there
go
are
ahead.
others also. So, but so you said that there is a difference. Like if we are always doing what we like, then it's sense gratification in sadhana bhakti.
Mm.
So how are we going to judge that and stop that? Because I sometimes feel that whatever we are like very much comfortable with, we like to prefer to do that
Mm.
as opposed to what we don't like that much. So how are we going to put a hard stop there and decide that no, we need to do we should at least try to do all the 64 limbs of
Yes.
bhakti?
So that is the spiritual master, right? That's why it's so important to surrender to a spiritual master. It's not just a tag that we say, oh, everyone should have this tag. No, this is why, because factually in the practice of bhakti, we cannot practice bhakti properly without the guidance of a spiritual master. Because otherwise we do what we want to do, not necessarily what Krishna wants us to do. So how do we know what Krishna wants us to do? It's by following the instruction, the order of the spiritual master. So accepting the spiritual master, this is why Rupa Goswami says it's the first 3 items of the 64 items, right? You mentioned, because the rest of the 64 items cannot be done without those 3 items. It's the 3 most important items, because he knows, or she knows, the spiritual master knows how to engage the disciple to actually purify the heart of the disciple. They know what our pressure point is, what our weak point is, what our big anartha in the heart is, that big thing that's stopping us from serving Krishna spontaneously. And they destroy that. And therefore the spiritual master, guru means very heavy. The spiritual master can be very heavy because he breaks that that thing that we cannot give up for many lifetimes. He'll let us break that in one lifetime, or in just 1 year, or in just 1 month. So we actually need the spiritual master for the practice of bhakti, for devotional service. And so both husband and wife, and this is also in response to your previous question, should surrender themselves to the order of the spiritual master, to the desire of the spiritual master, and then there'll be unity. Right? Because then you say your opinion, their opinion, differences of opinion. Which opinion do I go for? Well, if they both are following the instruction of a spiritual master, or even spiritual masters who are saying the same thing, then it becomes very easy. Well, it's not my desire, your desire. It's what our Guru Maharaj's desire is, and that's what we'll do. That's what we'll dedicate ourselves to.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Such a nice answer. Thank you so much, Hare Krishna. Thank you for so much time. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. 108, our password. Hare Krishna. You're on mute, Prabhu. Just unmute yourself.
Oh, yes. Dandavat Pranam, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for such a wonderful lectures that you have done so far. And we know that the same blessing will continue. Now, touching that point of anartha pravati, suppose if a senior devotee wants to help a junior one, but in the process makes some criticism of the junior, supposedly taught by the junior, what a junior devotee should in return do, react or just take it easy and forget about everything?
The junior devotee should see that Krishna is speaking. Not this person is speaking, but Krishna is speaking through this person to relieve my heart of something. That Krishna, that what's the bigger plan? The bigger plan is that Krishna is somehow or the other clarifying my heart through this devotee and telling me through this devotee that this is the area I need to improve in. Like there's one great saint in our movement, Hladini Mataji, and she would, in New Vrindavan, sometimes devotee would speak to her harshly, and she would say that I would not see the way it was given to me, that chastisement, but I would see that what is the message that Krishna is trying to tell me through this devotee. So maybe I need to be more clean. And this devotee comes and says, hey, you're always dirty, this, and says it in a very bad way. We don't appreciate it. So that is wrong. And we don't have to, accept that within our heart. We can reject the way that they said it. But we can accept the message that, okay, they're saying this. Anyone is saying something, they're saying this. So this is an opportunity for me to become better, to improve. Of course, if it becomes too bad, if it's too difficult for us, then we should share our heart to the devotee and say, maybe you can be a little soft towards me. And if that doesn't help either, we can avoid that devotee. But first of all, we should try to see that what is the message that Krishna is trying to tell me through this devotee? Because ultimately, Krishna is in control. So there's probably something that Krishna wants me to wake up to, and that's why he's making this devotee see it.
Yes, Prabhuji, and precisely that exactly what happened. Now I'll talk about myself.
Actually, Prabhu, I just have 3 minutes left. I have another call to go to that I teach. So maybe I will discuss next time. Next time we will continue with this, if that's okay. Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji. And a very nice point that you raised. I thank you. Vijayashri Mataji, last thing, I have 2 minutes exactly, and then I have to drop the call.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam. This is in response to the to Kamla Mataji's points when you should specifically engage in that type of devotional service which for which you have a natural aptitude. So I'm not so it's for menial services, day-to-day temple when we go to the temple and the menial services. Sometimes I personally have this approach of choosing taking up a service which I kind of might not be very comfortable with, say, or for example, prasadam serving. So everybody is excited. What is today's prasadam? And having a chance of getting all items and not missing out on
Ah.
the sweet or something. So I started serving prasadam, and then in my mind the point was, oh, whether it will get over, and then there will be senior devotees coming and saying that, servers should make their plate, or volunteers, come on, make your plate and keep it aside. So I thought, okay, let me not make a plate. Let me wait till the end. And sometimes you miss, but most of the time there is someone who will keep something aside for you if you wait till the end. So that helped me, that I think that might help me of overcoming the thought of serving myself first. So, should
Yes,
you do
very
such services with that intention, or should you think that what you're good at?
Yes, yes. No, this is a wonderful example. I mean, uh, uh, being good at something is different than trying to overcome a certain attachment. And like you're saying, we're attached to eating, the best prasadam. Of course, we don't have to purposely torture ourselves. So if it's just as easy to make a plate for ourselves and put it in the back, let's enjoy prasad, no problem. But but the act of giving up eating first and serving prasad is very, very nice, because that's bringing us in the consciousness that I'm the servant. I'm not the master. It's my duty to serve, not to enjoy. Now, of course, we need to eat and we have desires. So in order to manage that part, we made a plate, and that's Krishna Prasad. So it's like spiritualizing that desire. That we can do, but the idea of serving the devotees is so nice. And then we have a taste for prasad, so we're also developing the taste by eating prasad. So both things are there.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.
Hey.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much.